Hello and welcome to another lengthy scriptless video that is just going over one of the many lists that I have made because I'm weird. This is my top 30 favorite animated movies. This is what won the poll on Twitter, beating out my top 30 favorite video games. I'm glad that it won because this is a marginally less embarrassing list than my video game list or even my anime list that I did a few weeks back. Similar to my anime list, this will be based on my own enjoyment, and I don't have any real rules or stipulations this time. So long as it was an actual movie, so like over an hour. I think the shortest thing I was allowing was 70 minutes and that includes the credits. So long as it crosses that threshold, it was eligible for this list. I actually have 100 animated movies ranked, but I'm only going to go through the top 30 because I think I have a pretty solid top 30 here. Going any lower, we start getting into some questionable picks that I'm like, I really like Hoodwink, but it's probably shouldn't be that high. Oh, where should I put something like Naruto the Last? Because it's such a movie that's just made for me. I can't really recommend it to people who weren't already into Naruto. Both my top 30, I don't have to worry about any of that. These are all just really solid movies that I will be able to recommend to anyone who has even a remote interest in animation. Getting started with number 30, it's the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh has always been my comfort food. I don't think the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh is necessarily a great movie. In fact, it almost didn't make this list. I actually originally had Grave of the Fireflies from Studio Ghibli in this number 30 spot, but the more I thought on it, the more I had to have Winnie the Pooh somewhere on this list. This is actually more of a collection of shorts with the very clever framing device of the book, with some fourth wall breaks that I'm not super fond of. It's why it's this low on the list. But Winnie the Pooh, the character, his friends, his setting, has always been near and dear to my heart. It's just so wholesome and so, it's impossible to hate. I have not seen a single thing from Winnie the Pooh I haven't liked. It always just hits me right where I live, and that's why it's on this list. So, getting into number 29 is Hunchback of Notre Dame, the 1996 Disney movie. This has always been a personal favorite of mine. I watched this movie a lot as a kid. It does have problems, particularly with how shoehorned the comedy is a lot with the gargoyles, but it takes a very dark and mature story and it does Disneyfy it a bit, and I don't even think it's the darkest Disney movie. It's darker than a lot of Disney movies for sure, but it does offset it with the aforementioned comedic relief. But it's very food for thought heavy. Like, it really makes you think about this situation, these sorts of people. It hits you over the head with the whole, what makes a monster and what makes a man motif. But it's really careful in how it portrays these groups of people in a way that I think is very interesting. Modern day Disney does not do this. Modern day Disney, it's like there is no bad guys. It's just misguided people or people with bad ideas or bad execution of good ideas. It makes it interesting, but it also sanitizes it a lot in recent Disney movies. Whereas this is like, oh yeah, they are human, they are, people, but they do messed up things as well. Like the gypsies, are they good? Are they not? Frollo kind of has a point, and we know he kind of has a point because we actually see the place where the gypsies keep all their stolen stuff. What really puts this movie over the top for me, though, other than the, amazing animation, but it's Disney and it's 90s Disney. Even by that point, having stellar animation is kind of just par for the course. Like, there's no excuse to not have good animation in a Disney movie at this point. But it's the music. The music really puts it over the top. It has some of my favorite musical numbers. I love Hellfire. I actually did a video on Hellfire way back at the beginning of my channel. The Bells of Notre Dame is probably my favorite opening Disney song. I really like Topsy Turvy. I really like God Help the Outcast. And I really love the Court of Miracles song. So, number 28 is another Ghibli movie, and it's another one that I think I only saw once. I don't think I've ever rewatched this movie. But Princess Mononoke came out in 1997, and again, like, I don't remember much outside of the just stellar animation, and I remember the basics of the story. It's very 90s environmentalist, which I'm fine with. I'm kind of an environmentalist. I say kinda. On top of, I think, having possibly the best style of Ghibli. And Ghibli has a very consistent style. All of their movies are kind of like minor variations. Occasionally, they'll do something completely out of left field, like Princess Kaguya. But this one, there's something about the character designs and the way that they designed these animals that just, it's really awesome. Awesome is the word I would use. Again, like, it uses kind of the Disney school of keeping things grounded while also using the animation medium to its fullest. At number 27 is Bambi. But this was one of the first Disney movies, and it's really where the reputation for Disney's grounded style comes from. This is the movie that Walt Disney had his animators watch wildlife. Like, they actually found a couple deer or went to like a nature reserve where there are deer, and they just watched them and sketched them and filmed them for hours in order to get reference stuff. They're always using reference, and the result is a very grounded physics-based animation with some spectacular vistas. The backgrounds in this movie are jaw-dropping. The music's alright. The story is probably its weakest spot, I think. It's why it's this low on the list and not higher. You all know the story Bambi. It centers around a deer as he grows up and deals with life, and that's kind of it. It's actually, story-wise, now that I'm thinking about it, kind of reminds me of modern Disney, with how it's just a sequence of things that happen, and, there's no real villain. You can say man, but we don't ever actually see any of the humans. We only hear their gunshots, which is enough, honestly. It's very effective, very well-directed movie. Hats off to, I have it written down here, David Hand. David Hand was the supervising director on this movie. And I know he must have worked on a lot of older Disney movies as well. But it's not a name I'm very familiar with. It's a classic. It holds up, again, from what I remember. It's been a while. And it's kind of always been on the higher tiers of Disney movies for me. Number 26 is The Iron Giant. This was the 1999 movie by Warner Brothers Animations. I believe it's the only Warner Brothers Animation movie on this list, at least in my top 30. And it was actually directed by Brad Bird. Brad Bird had worked with Disney for a while, back in like the 80s. I think he worked on Fox and the Hound and was an animator on a couple other movies throughout the late 70s, early 80s. But he went to Warner Brothers, and this was his first, I believe it was his first directorial outing. It's a movie about a gun that doesn't want to be a gun. That's the premise, and that's the hook. And that's a really interesting hook. What holds this movie back is, it's not the premise, and it's not the execution, because it's very well executed. There's something, like, of the time about this. Maybe it's the fact that a lot of movies around this time were doing the E.T. thing where child finds friend who is not normal and the military gets involved. E.T. came out in 1982, and there were a lot of E.T. clones, and honestly, I think Iron Giant does fall into a lot of those same tropes. Which is, fine. It's a fine enough premise. Again, it really hooks it with the theme of a gun that doesn't want to be a gun. But if you want to know why this isn't in my top 5 like I've seen it for some other people, that's why. There's a little too much ET in here for me to put it any higher. I do really like that Warner Brothers uses the fact that they own Superman in order to hammer home the point. And they did this a lot around this time. They actually still kind of do, honestly, where Superman is this massive icon of pop culture and has been for decades, almost 100 years at this point. And he's been kind of the symbol of superheroes. He is the superhero. And because Warner Brothers owns the rights to him, they have free reign to reference him in all their other stuff. Getting on to number 25 is Secret of Kells. And this is a 2009 movie by Tom Moore. The studio's Cartoon Saloon. This was their first feature-length movie. They are an Irish animation studio who you will see a couple other times on this list. The movie is about a boy named Brendan who lives within the walls of Kells. Kells being a community in medieval Ireland. He is wanting to help this monk write the Book of Kells. The Book of Kells is a very real thing. It is it's either Gaelic or Latin translation of the gospel. So, kind of like Hunchback and Notre Dame, you have those instant themes of religion and how it factors into things. Although this one is nowhere near as coy about it as Hunchback. This is very much like, nah, these are monks. This is straight up the Bible. We're throwing around words like pagan and stuff in this movie. Brendan befriends a little fairy girl named Ashlyn and uses this book to inspire her. The story does sag a bit in places, and that's what's holding this back, and that is something I think is improved in Cartoon Saloon's latter output. I don't think they've made a movie quite as striking visually. Wolfwalkers comes close and surpasses it in some scenes, but we'll get to that. Spoiler. Secret of Kells, it uses this medieval tapestry painting style with its art, and its animation is just jaw-dropping. Every single frame is a painting. I usually don't like to say stuff like that, but for Cartoon Saloon and Tom Moore's works in particular, that applies. He really likes to get a lot of mileage out of these swirls and circles and these twisting vines that he likes to draw in his movies. And the character animation is great. It's just a gorgeous thing to look at. Number 24 is How to Train Your Dragon. This is the 2010 film by DreamWorks. It's very popular, so I'm not going to talk about it for very long. This is the best DreamWorks series, I think. As far as pound for pound, movie for movie, How to Train Your Dragon is DreamWorks' best. I like Hiccup, I like Toothless. I like the side characters for the most part. I really like Astrid, the main girl. And I love the parent dynamic you get in these movies. With, is it Gerard Butler who plays his dad? Yes, Gerard Butler. And then it's Cate Blanchett that plays his mom in the second movie. Yeah. Second movie is almost as good. The second movie, just for a frame of reference, How to Train Your Dragon 2 is number 40 on my list. So if I were to extend it by another 10, I would have started off this video talking about How to Train Your Dragon 2. How to Train Your Dragon, I think, has the best overall plot of the three movies. The animation is really good. The art and animation is just something that How to Train Your Dragon did better and better with each subsequent movie. But yeah, it's worth the hype for sure. Number 23 is Zootopia, another Disney movie, this one from 2016. I think this has the best script of any Disney movie. It is very meticulous in a way Disney movies have never really tried to be. And I know part of that is because it's supposed to be like a buddy cop drama. And so there is this inherent air of mystery about it. Whereas in other Disney movies, they're fairy tales. Things just happen, and they happen because that's the story they want to tell. And that's totally fine and dandy. You can make complete and utter masterpieces out of that idea. Zootopia doesn't really have that going for it because it is kind of more grounded, and it does try to make its world a lot more believable, a lot more realistic for what it is. It is still furry bait, but the story is very good. It's got a lot of cool themes. It's got a lot of cool characters. The animation it's serviceable. It's fine. It's Disney. It's gonna be good. I am glad that this won Best Animated Film at the Oscars for that year. The only thing really holding this movie back is that it kind of has a surprise twist villain for the sake of having a twist. And I know a lot of people don't like that about this movie. I was fine with it, but I do have to address, that without spoiling, at least. Number 22 is How to Train Your Dragon 3, the best of the trilogy, in my humble opinion. I love the villain in this movie. And as I said already, the animation is just, it somehow is miles above what the first movie was 9 years earlier. They just kept on improving. They really tightened up the story here. Unlike the second movie, the reason why the second movie isn't on this list or in my top 30 is because the second movie really struggled with finding things for the side characters to do. The side characters are all well designed, well acted, and have these cool personalities or interesting personalities. I wouldn't say cool for any of them. They are not cool characters, but that's kind of the joke. This movie, I think, even more so than the first one, it found really good things to do with the side characters. And that's why this movie is just that little smidge better than the first movie. So number 21 is Up. If I was judging it just off the first 5 minutes, this would maybe be number 1. This was actually a really tough sell for me. It's a testament to how amazing the writing and animation is in this that it's in my top 30. Because the premise, I think, is really fucking dumb. I think the whole idea of old man uses helium balloons to uproot his house and travel the world is just the silliest goddamn thing Pixar has ever done. Now, I was in high school when this movie came out, and I was not really into Disney at that time. I kind of fallen out of love with Disney for a while. And this movie did not help it, by the way. Just letting you know, this isn't oh man, this movie changed my mind. Nah, this movie, I kind of thought it was overrated. I do think it's overrated, but it is still number 21 on my list because it is still that damn good. I want to have this movie lower, but I just can't in good consciousness. With how much I ended up enjoying it, with how good it is just from a technical standpoint and how tight the script is. It's not the tightest script, but it's serviceable, it's good enough. But all of that just, it elevates it and makes it to where I can't put this any lower than number 21. I know people that have this in their top 10, and I totally get it. I get it. Number 20 on my list is Toy Story 3. This one came out in 2010. That's 15 years after the original. And the spoiler for 2 of my other spots, this is actually, I think, the weakest of the 3 movies. It's a little more mean-spirited than the other 2. And that's saying something because the first one was already kind of mean-spirited. a lot of it kind of feels been there, done that. The reason why it's this high is because the whole been there, done that they're doing is an escape film, and I love heist films. I love escape films. I love these puzzle box type movies. And Toy Story, at the end of the day, it is an escape movie franchise. It just happens to feature toys. Like all three of these movies, all four if you count Toy Story 4 even, but even Toy Story 4 falls into this, where it is, at the end of the day, a movie about toys trying to escape from a bad situation. With Toy Story 3, it was the perfect conclusion to the trilogy. It cemented Toy Story's spot as probably the best film trilogy ever. Right up there with like Lord of the Rings and OG Star Wars and Godfather. If Godfather 3 wasn't a massive backslide. Toy Story 3, it's great. I love it. I love the ending. I love the whole last half hour of the movie. I love the whole movie actually, but the last half hour is if I was judging this list based on the last act of each movie, this would be number 1, hands down. Number 19 is, I don't know how controversial this is going to be. It's Inside Out. 2015 Pixar, directed by Pete Docter. It's basically the same team as Up, but for some reason this movie just resonated with me in a way that Up didn't really. Up is maybe the more technically better film and probably the more technically better written film, but Inside Out is it's more up my alley. I love movies that take these kind of esoteric concepts and personify them. I love stuff like that. In this movie, it personifies each of the major emotions, I guess. They picked 5, even though there's hundreds of emotions you can feel. They picked 5 to streamline it and give these are the dominant emotions inside this little girl. And it's all like the personification of puberty. And I love that about this movie. And it's also very colorful. It's a lot more stylized than other Pixar films tend to be. You can really tell that Pixar, which is run by John Lasseter, and Studio Ghibli, which is not run by Miyazaki, but Miyazaki did all their best work. You can really tell that John Lasseter and Hayao Miyazaki are friends and have really inspired each other, because over the years I've kind of noticed that Ghibli gets more and more like Pixar, whereas Pixar gets more and more like Ghibli. And Inside Out is kind of the apex of that cultural osmosis, which is why it's my favorite looking Pixar movie, even more so than movies that are going to be above it. Number 18 is The Secret of Nim. This is one of the most significant movies, I think, as far as the history of film animation. Not because of anything that it does, but because of what it isn't. What it isn't is a Disney movie. For many, many years, for decades, Disney was dominant. Disney was the only really good quality force in film animation. From the time that Snow White came out in the 1930s, all the way up until this movie came out in 1982, Disney didn't have any competition, and because they didn't have any competition, they got comfy, they got cocky, they rested on their laurels. Their output in the 70s and 80s was subpar. They didn't come out with a lot of good movies in that time period. But Don Bluth, who had previously worked with Disney on Fox and the Hound, which if you ever look it up, Fox and the Hound, it's an okay movie. Look at that credit list. But Don Bluth went on to make his own animation studio, Don Bluth Productions, I believe, and United Artists. And he worked with Universal. He would eventually team up with Amblin Entertainment, which is Steven Spielberg's production company, and they would make a couple movies together. Secret of Nim was the first movie from this batch. As such, it is the first movie to really give Disney a run for their money. It was like, oh my god, this is Disney level animation, but it's darker than Disney, and it's more character driven than Disney tends to be. Disney at the time, they were very technical heavy. You know, you had movies like 101 Dalmatians, which was just like, hey, look at this new technology we have to animate this. Honestly, Disney does still kind of fall into that sometimes. There's like, oh man, look at all these snow particle effects we got. And Don Bluth would continue to give Disney a run for their money all throughout the 80s. It really made Disney have to reevaluate their company, reorganize, and put some different people in charge, which is what would later create the Disney Renaissance. Without Don Bluth and without that competition, there wouldn't have been that innovation within Disney. There wouldn't have been that innovation within animation as a medium. Certainly not film animation. So, because of that, Secret of Nim is a very important movie. Because of that, we have this competitive market with animation that has bred innovation ever since. And that's why most of these movies on this list are Disney and or Pixar, is because of how dominant Disney was for so long. The idea of other animation studios giving Disney a run for its money is a relatively new thing. Even, Don Bluth and United Artists, they're not actually around anymore. They kind of got replaced by DreamWorks in the late 90s. DreamWorks became Disney's biggest competition, and then, nowadays we have like Sony Animation, Warner Brothers doing their things. We got Illumination. And we got a lot of different animation studios now that we just didn't back then. And again, like, it's all thanks to Secret of Nim, which, even on its own, it's a fantastic movie. The characters are just fascinating. It asks some really heavy themes about, like, it asks some pretty heavy questions about, like, parenthood and science versus nature, which is a theme I've always liked. Number 17 is Finding Nemo, another very famous movie. You don't need me to tell you why it's good. You've probably seen it already. It's gorgeous. It's Pixar. It's funny. It's got a lot of cool characters. It's very colorful in a way that Pixar hadn't really nailed before then. Like, they've nailed it almost every single time after this, but I think this was when Pixar came into their own as, we make things look pretty. Because before then, the novelty hadn't worn off on CGI animation. By 2003, the novelty was like, oh, look at this, it's all CGI. And kind of all worn off by 2003. But this movie is like, okay, yes, we aren't just we make things look good or we make things groundbreaking. We also write extremely well written scripts with great pacing and great characters. Number 16 is the most recent movie on this list, and it's The Wolfwalkers. This is a 2020 movie by Cartoon Saloon that was released for Apple Plus, and it is the only thing on Apple Plus that is worth a damn. But it is gorgeous. It's the first movie Cartoon Saloon has done since Secret of Kells that has really recaptured Secret of Kells' signature look. It's very nature heavy. But unlike Secret of Kells, Secret of Kells had a lot of bright greens and blues, whereas this, it's much more autumn. It's much more like rustic oranges and browns and dark greens. But visually, I think Tom Moore, he really outdid himself with this one. And script-wise, it's a more involved and deep story than Tom Moore's other two films, Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea. It's not quite as dark or grounded as The Breadwinner, which was Cartoon Saloon's third movie. It's somewhere on this list, lower. I have a couple issues with it that I'm not going to get into. That kept it out of the top 30, kept it out of the top 50, I think. I think it's lower than number 50. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Cartoon Saloon, they're batting 1,000. They haven't made a bad movie yet. And this one, while it's not my favorite, I think it's the best animated, and I think it might be the best written. It's certainly got the most involved script. Now, whether that complexity equals quality, Now I can take it or leave it. When compared to, my actual favorite Cartoon Saloon movie. Yeah. I think this is, the best animated movie since the last time Cartoon Saloon made a movie, honestly. They're my favorite. I'm rooting for them to get more and more success. Number 15 on my list is Coraline. This was the first feature-length animated movie by Laika Productions. It is stop motion. It's by Henry Selick, who is a veteran of stop motion animation. It's based on the book by Neil Gaiman. I did read the book. I read the book after watching the movie. And they are different. And they're different because Henry Selick was already working on the movie as Neil Gaiman was still writing it. Like, Neil Gaiman and Henry Selick, they're friends, shared back and forth. So even though the book came out a couple years before the movie did, the movie had like a 5 to 7 year production cycle or something, which is why Dakota Fanning is in this as Coraline, and she sounds 10, and she's playing a 10-year-old, even though when this movie came out, she was like 16 or 17 by then. But that's because she was 10 when she recorded her lines, and it just took that long for the movie to come out. This has, I think, the best stop-motion animation I've ever seen to date. I don't think Laika has outdone themselves since then. I think Laika Productions is also patting 1,000, but Paranorman, Kubo and the Two Strings, Box Trolls, they don't hit as hard as this movie did, and I don't really know why. It might be because of the style. As it's certainly not the script. The script is just, it's your basic Alice in Wonderland type. A girl goes into the other world through magic portal and adventures ensue. Maybe it's Coraline herself. Maybe it's because Coraline is just a much more fascinating character on her own than Paranorman or Kubo or any of the other characters from Laika's other movies. But yeah, this is, in my opinion, as far as just the technical aspects of the stop motion, I think it is the best stop motion movie. There's one stop motion movie that is higher on this list, but it's higher on this list because of other reasons that have nothing to do with this animation. Number 14 is Kikis Delivery Service, the first Ghibli movie I think I ever watched. This was also, I think, maybe the first one that got an English dub, which would also explain why it was the first one I ever watched. It was originally released in 1989 and made by Miyazaki. I think it was 1989. I kind of had some conflicting information when I tried Googling it earlier. It's about a young witch who is just trying to find her way in the world and try to find, where she fits in with all this new society stuff that she's being exposed to. It's a really great coming-of-age story. I think it is also maybe a metaphor for puberty, and if so, then it probably works better than Inside Out, honestly. Maybe. It's a better movie than Inside Out. I mean, obviously, I think so. It's a lot higher on this list. Kiki is just such a cute character. This is probably Ghibli's cutest movie. Just with all the character designs and the environmental work. Miyazaki really likes his use of green in all of his movies, including this one. And the soundtrack. I don't think Ghibli gets enough credit for their scores. This one has the best score of any of Ghibli's movies, at least of the ones I've seen. There's only a few that I've ever missed. Number 13 on this list is Shrek II, the best Shrek movie. This one came out in 2004. Not only do I think it's the best Shrek movie, I think it's the best DreamWorks movie. Again, it's a very famous movie. You don't need my endorsement. It's funny. It subverts the fairy tale tropes without coming off as angry as the first Shrek movie did. The main problem with the first Shrek movie is that it's really just taking pot shots at Disney, and you can already feel that even if you don't know any of the background of that movie. If you do know the background of that movie, then Katzenberg just comes off as a petty asshole. This one, it was a little later. It was 2004, whereas the first one was in 2001. Katzenberg had kind of gotten over his grudge with Disney and was a lot more focused on making an actual quality product. Whereas every other DreamWorks movie before this kind of felt like knockoff Disney. But I think Shrek 2 is fantastic. I do think it's better than the original, and you don't really see that very often where the sequel is better than the original. Although, it happens a lot with DreamWorks, I found. I think Kung Fu Panda 2 is better than the first one. I think Madagascar 2 is better than the first one. And I think How to Train Your Dragon 3 is the best How to Train Your Dragon movie. Also, did they do the Trolls movies? I haven't seen either Trolls movie, but from what I've heard, the second one is also better than the first. DreamWorks just does damn good sequels, I guess. Number 12 is Aladdin. The thing about lists like this is that you get to a certain point where there's nothing really to talk about. Like, what can I say about Aladdin that you haven't heard from people more prepared and more articulate than me? It's hilarious. It's got great music. Every single song is a banger. The genie is just amazing, and Robin Williams does such a good job with him, and a lot of it's ad-libbed, which just makes it even more impressive. The character of Aladdin himself is great and interesting. Jasmine is a great and interesting princess who doesn't follow a lot of the same Disney princess tropes. Even though, honestly, thinking about all the Disney princesses, very few of them actually fall into the Disney princess traps that have been mocked. For real, honestly. The villain, Jafar, is so much fun. And Iago, played by the always excellent Gilbert Gottfried, is such a great villain sidekick. And this is... God, if it wasn't following up Beauty and the Beast, this would maybe be higher. But yeah, this was peak Disney Renaissance era Disney. Number 11 on my list is from the first ever batch of Disney movies, and that is Pinocchio. I believe this was their second ever movie. And as far as stuff that is hand-drawn, and only hand-drawn without any assistance from any computers, this is Disney's best-looking movie. So it might actually still be their best-looking movie ever, and it came out in 1940. Yes, there may be more impressive-looking movies comparatively, but you gotta think, when you talk about technical aspects, you always have to have the asterisk of the time it was made in. Like, Aladdin is an amazing-looking movie in 1992. That could be both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing when you think about it and try to compare it with other movies that came out way later, but it's a good thing if you compare, like, movies that came out in 1992. Pinocchio, it's great. It looks great for 1940. It looks great for 1960. It looks great for 2020. It's just so much blood, sweat, and tears went into making this movie. It is just a technical marvel on every single level. And not just with the animation, but also with the editing and the music and the voice acting. And the story is also really good, which is just a bonus. The story being decent and competently written is just the cherry on top with this movie. But speaking of well written, number 10 is The Great Mouse Detective. This is a personal favorite of mine. I know a lot of people would have this a lot lower. I know a couple of people that might have this a lot higher. This is the best Sherlock Holmes movie I think has ever been made. Even though it's not technically Sherlock, it's the mouse that lives in Sherlock Holmes. If you've seen the movie, you know the context. I love the villain. It's Ratigan, played by Missouri boy Vincent Price. And it's a delight. It's the best looking Disney movie from that era, and that era being the Xerox era, being that era where Disney kind of dropped the ball a lot. Again, like this is 1986. This was right before the Renaissance and long after Disney's death in the 1960s. So it's kind of like that upswing. It came out, I believe this was the first movie that got released after Black Cauldron came out, and Black Cauldron was the big box office flop that really made Disney reevaluate what they were doing with their company and with their animation. So this is kind of that upswing. It's also the first one that incorporated CGI elements, and it's all blended together fine. The animation is not this movie's strongest point, though. The strongest point is that it is really well written. This probably has the second best script of any Disney movie behind Zootopia. And that script, along with the animation, along with the characters and the songs, I think there's like 2. But all of that, it just forms a package that is greater than the sum of its parts, I think. And the fact that this is the greatest Sherlock Holmes movie ever gives it a bunch of extra bonus points because, I am a man. I have my needs. Now, number 9 is the best looking movie I have ever seen. And that is Song of the Sea. Overall, best looking movie. I think there's a couple of movies that have technically better animation or technically better editing, technically better direction. I think there's movies from Cartoon Saloon that have technically better animation. Wolfwalkers, I think, has technically better animation. But no movie from Cartoon Saloon, no movie from Disney just has this awe-inspiring vision. The closest I can think of is Pinocchio, actually. It looks a lot like Pinocchio with how it uses its backgrounds. But it's definitely not as impressive as Pinocchio, considering Pinocchio came out in 1940, Song of the Sea came out in 2014. Although I think that impressiveness is offset by the fact that Pinocchio was a Disney movie with, a lot of money thrown at it, adjusting for inflation, millions and millions of dollars, whereas Song of the Sea is an indie film at the end of the day. It's Cartoon Saloon. They're just a small Irish animation studio, and Tom Moore is, this was his second movie. This was the first movie he did after Secret of Kells, and it took him 5 years just to make this one. The story is a lot tighter than Secret of Kells, but it's not as complex as Wolfwalkers. It's a lot simpler. It's about a boy named Ben trying to escort his little Selkie sister home so that she can bring balance to the world. It's very, we've kind of been there, done that, but I don't think we've ever been there, done that with such just beauty. This is just a gorgeous movie from beginning to end. Even when it's still being all grounded and realistic, it's still finding ways to be really creative with it. And that's not even getting into the little story details like the use of drugs. And I don't mean hard drugs, I don't mean anything illegal. And that honestly makes it way heavier. The fact that there's a lot of prescription medication that is used for a certain plot beat that gets reflected in the spirits, in a certain spirit in particular. And it does this Wizard of Oz thing where every human character we meet has some kind of parallel within the spirit community. The grandmother in particular, she has this it's for your own good attitude, which is a common theme or motif in Cartoon Saloon movies directed by Tom Moore. Kind of makes me wonder what his upbringing was like. Because, the abbot from Kells, the grandmother here, the parents in Breadwinner, and then the father in Wolfwalkers all kind of have the same thing going on. But yeah, it's a gorgeous movie. It's well written, and the last 5 minutes actually brought tears to my eyes. I don't tear up in movies. I just don't. It's very rare for anything to really, like, get to me like that Song of the Sea did. Number 8 on my list is The Incredibles. Again, you don't need any explanation for me for why this is so high. It's Pixar's best movie that isn't called Toy Story. It's Brad Bird's best movie that he's done in his career. And it's this really awesome throwback to vintage 60s action. It blends 60s action with superheroes, the spy stuff with James Bond and Mission Impossible. It's just a solid movie, and it's just a solid superhero movie. It's got a solid family dynamic. It's got an excellent voice cast. Probably the best voice cast on this entire list. And yeah, it's one of those movies that you can watch over and over and over again. It's mind-numbingly good with its action and direction and animation. Now, number 7 is a little more off-kilter, and that is Disney's Alice in Wonderland. I don't see this movie get put very high in the Disney tier list, but it is my favorite old-school Disney movie by the very wide margin. And it's hard to describe why without talking about why I love Alice in Wonderland, the book. The book is very creative and it's very poetic. Lewis Carroll was a poet, actually. And so his books had this very poetic flow to them. And this has a similar flow, but what makes this the best adaptation of Alice in Wonderland and what makes this the best old school Disney movie is that it wasn't afraid to mix things up. This is not a one-to-one retelling of Alice in Wonderland. It blends elements of Alice in Wonderland with Through the Looking Glass, with just that Disney flair. It's got songs and stuff that kind of adapt the poems by Lewis Carroll a little bit sometimes, but not always. I think it is one of the best adaptations ever for that reason. So many times you see these people, and fans are even more guilty of this, because fans, like, they demand just, no cuts, bring us Tom Bombadil in Lord of the Rings, and don't change anything in Harry Potter, and who cares if it completely destroys the pacing like the One Piece anime? Whereas this is like, no, that we can't do a one-to-one translation of Alice in Wonderland. This is a movie. Alice in Wonderland is a book. It's a book with illustrations, sure, but it's still a very different medium. And so it uses the strengths of its chosen medium to its advantage by changing stuff in the books, without ruining anything that made the book so spectacular. It still has all the same creativity, it still has all the same characterization. It has this surprisingly dark art style. Like, there's a lot of dark backgrounds that offset the colorful cast that's in the foregrounds, and it's just a very perfectly directed movie that really does adhere to its own dreamlike, weird Wonderland logic in a way that other Wonderland adaptations just fail, because there's so many other Wonderland adaptations try to be too much like the books or not enough like the books. This one, it really hits that perfect balance. Number 6 is the best animated movie, not at all really connected with Disney, although it kind of is, because it's Don Bluth, and as I already said, Don Bluth actually got to start with Disney. But other than that tangential connection, Disney had nothing to do with the production or distribution of this movie in any way, shape, or form, and that is Land Before Time. A movie I would maybe like even more if they at least had period-accurate versions of the dinosaurs, but it's a fantastic story with fantastic characters, and it's dinosaurs. I love dinosaurs, if you didn't know that already. It's also really dark. Don Bluth movies tend to have this... Okay, I should qualify that. Early Don Bluth movies tend to have this very kind of morbid sensibility where things just get really dark. And yes, things also get dark in Disney movies a lot more than people care to admit. But a lot of times in Disney movies, it's either part of the background, or it's off screen, or it's just implied like it is in Hunchback and Notre Dame. But here it's like, no, this is an actual plot relevant character death that you see in all of its visceral glory in a way that you didn't get with Bambi's mom or even Mufasa years later. And that's just. This is a very somber and very serious movie, despite being about 5 prehistoric reptile youths, 4 dinosaur babies, and a pterosaur baby, just trying to find their way to the Great Valley, which is this paradise that totally isn't heaven, by the way, and totally isn't like, just this big metaphor for, life and death and what awaits us in the afterlife. That's totally not, the point of the movie. It's time to move on to number 5, and that is Toy Story 2. A lot of people will say this is the best Toy Story movie. It is the best written Toy Story movie. It is the best, probably, animated Toy Story movie. But what it is not is the first Toy Story movie. It's hard to really quantify that without really getting into details that I just don't have the time to get into today. Toy Story 2, it is the sequel to Toy Story. It was the third Pixar movie. It came out in 1999. It was so good that Disney ended their sequel policy. Before this movie, Disney had a no sequel policy, or no sequels in theater policy. That was actually started not that long ago, earlier, with the financial failure of Rescuers Down Under, which is a fantastic movie still. But it failed to impress in the box office, so Disney said, okay, no sequels in theaters. If you're going to make sequels, do it straight to home video. Toy Story 2 ended that policy by just being so amazing. It really improves on the first movie in so many regards that I kind of feel guilty not having this movie number 1. Or at least number 2. Actually, the reason why it's not number 2 is because I kind of want to put some distance between this and Toy Story. All 6 of these movies, Land Before Time, Toy Story 2, and the next 4 on my list, any one of these could be number 1, honestly, if I were to, kind of tweak the criteria a little bit. But yeah, Toy Story 2 was another one that, the When She Loved Me musical number, it actually makes me start to tear up every time I think about it. So, number 4 is the highest rated movie on this list not made in America, and that is Spirited Away. It's also the first Ghibli movie I saw that I knew was Ghibli, or that I kind of knew what I was watching. With Kikis Delivery Service, when I watched it, was just another animated movie because I was just a kid. Spirited Away, I watched it when it premiered on Toonami, and I've watched it several times since then. And it blows my mind every time. It's not afraid to get quiet. And this is a weakness you see in a lot of Disney movies. Disney movies, they tend to have quiet scenes, but they don't last very long. It's because they feel the need to constantly throw in musical numbers, jokes, drama, action. They try to be the whole package, and sometimes they are, like Aladdin, Pinocchio, or Incredibles, Great Mouse Detective, Alice in Wonderland. They are the complete package in most regards. But Spirited Away has several lengthy sequences where it just gets quiet. And it really lets the animators breathe and breathe life into this world, which just makes it feel more real, despite it being this crazy nightmare spirit world. Anyway, moving on to number 3, it's Nightmare Before Christmas, the best stop-motion animated movie. This is another one that needs no explanation. It's near and dear to my heart. What puts it above Coraline, and what puts it this far above Coraline, is the music. Every single musical number is amazing. The stop-motion animation is great, sure. I think Coraline is a technically better movie as far as the stop-motion animation goes. But Nightmare Before Christmas, it came out a whole, 15 years earlier. So it can be forgiven a little bit. And stop-motion animation was kind of seen as archaic. You didn't get full-length movies like this before Nightmare Before Christmas. But what puts it above a lot of the other movies on this list is just the style. This Halloween aesthetic that is also used to adapt other well, namely Christmas, other holidays, actually is really just Christmas, without making Christmas look like just Halloween with snow. Like, it's this very careful balance that Nightmare Before Christmas strikes. And it strikes it perfectly, on top of having, like, great script, great animation, great characters, great songs, great everything. Again, like, with lists like this, the higher up you go, the less there is to say, because I've already said everything I need to say about this movie when I was talking about Coraline and other movies. Now, this is just all of that and more and better. Speaking of all of this but more and better, number 2 on my list is Beauty and the Beast, one of the very few movies that has the pleasure of getting a 10 out of 10 rating from me. I think it's perfect in every single way. What makes a 10 out of 10 movie a 10 out of 10 movie for me is how well it leans into and utilizes what others would consider flaws. So this movie, yeah, it's not the tightest script, it's not the most realistic script, but it's a fairy tale, and it uses that fairy tale logic to its advantage. It doesn't try to bog the movie down by explaining everything like this stupid fucking remake does. No, it just lets it be. It leaves it alone, lets the characters thrive, lets the music hit, lets the emotions hit, lets the animation hit, lets everything hit the way it needs to in order to elicit those emotional reactions from the audience. This movie was nominated for Best Picture back when that meant something. And like I said, it's just everything is where it needs to be, the way it needs to be, in order to just punctuate everything that the story has to offer, even if it is a played out story. Even if we had seen hundreds of Beauty and the Beast adaptations before this, and we've seen hundreds more since this. This is the best adaptation of Beauty and the Beast because it lets the story alone while also adapting it and making it, making the most of it for the film medium, making the changes that they need to, making it as interesting as they need to, making it just the way it needs to in order to be the best piece of art it can be. And number 1 on my list is Toy Story. It's not only one of the few movies that I've given a 10 out of 10, just like Beauty and the Beast. It's my favorite animated movie. It's my favorite Pixar movie. It's one of my favorite movies, period. And I actually have trouble justifying why I like it more than Toy Story 2. Without saying like, oh, it's groundbreaking. It's the more original movie. Now, it was the first of its kind, whereas Toy Story 2 was the second of its kind. Like, even aside from that, I think the best way I can rationalize this is that Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3 are about the characters. Toy Story 1 is about the characters, but it's also about so much more than that. What separates this movie from its sequels and from everything else is that there is something bigger than the characters going on, but that thing that is bigger than the characters does not distract from the characters. And that thing is Andy. I think Andy, the reverence that this movie has for him, even more than its sequels, which yes, Andy has a lot of reverence in the sequels as well, but that reverence and the way it plays into these very cultural heavy themes and references to how, the Western died at the hand of sci-fi with Star Wars, and how, Westerns just aren't popular anymore, and how fads change, all that stuff. On top of the things like, oh, what does it mean to be a toy? What does it mean to serve someone greater than yourself? And the fact that it takes these two fascinating characters with different ideologies, pits them against each other, and they both grow and change. Toy Story 2 and 3, it kind of becomes the Woody show. It kind of becomes Woody's constant temptation to leave Andy and do something else, but kind of pulling himself back together, and Buzz pulling him back in. Toy Story 2 was a lot like that with the museum subplot and Woody's roundup. And Toy Story 3, it was like Woody was the one pulling everyone else back because they all thought that Andy was going to throw them away. So they decided to ditch and go to this daycare, but then that ended up being a nightmare prison because, again, at the end of the day, this is an escape movie franchise. And then Toy Story 4, I think, is just shameful in how it takes all that development, just like, nope, fuck it. Woody's gonna leave everyone behind. Everything he's ever known, everyone he's ever cared about. He's gonna just run and be free with Bo Peep. And, God, Toy Story 4 was so frustrating. This movie, because it has the biggest arcs for its two main leads, and that it parallels that with actual cultural themes that a lot of people, particularly those in a generation above mine, like my parents' generation, would relate to. And we'd all relate to it on some level, not specifically with Western and sci-fi, but we've seen other trends and stuff die. I've seen the mascot platformer, go the way of the dodo. And, mascot platformers were very near and dear to my heart when I was a kid, and I kind of lost interest in them after a while. So I think we can all relate to that on some level. And because of that is why Toy Story is just a smidge better than Toy Story 2. And by a smidge, I mean it's better than Toy Story 2. And then also Spirited Away, Nightmare Before Christmas, and Beauty and the Beast. So that is my top 30 animated film list. What did you think about it? What are your favorite animated movies? How would you place things differently for me? Is there anything that you think I missed? Is there anything that you think I shouldn't have had on the list? Let me know in the comments below. I'm Mediocrity4. Thanks for watching.